Just recently, Photoshop dropped one of the best features I've seen in a long time, and that is Generative Fill, as well as the Remove Tool function. Now, this video is specifically going to be about Generative Fill. However, I'm going to introduce the Remove Tool function. If there's any other things that you'd like to see me do with this, please let me know. And the reason I made this video is for one reason alone, and that is I was really skeptical about the demo videos. I wasn't really sure that it did as good as they normally say, because obviously they like to use good examples and where it works perfectly, but I want to see where it failed and what limits I can push. So today I'm going to talk about that with this particular image. And just as an example, to give you a little preview of what I did earlier in just one go, this is the after and this is the before, all with Generative Fill. And if you weren't amazed yet, you're going to be, because there's even more that I can do with it. So let me just go ahead and delete that so we can start from scratch here. What I did initially was I kind of just expanded the frame. And the way that I did that was I used the crop tool here to expand the frame based off of what the original image was. And then I hit OK. And then I have the background with the white border. Now, I want to fill in this particular area, and how would I do that? And just a little bit of context, this particular image is of my dear friend Emily, who came to assist me last year in Iceland. We were doing this creative adventure where we take a very small hand-selected group of photographers to different parts of the world and curate shoots for them. And if you're interested or curious, we have another one coming up in Iceland later this year. I'll drop the link in the description if you're interested in joining us. But one of the beautiful parts about this is we all get to bond really well, and I take my camera everywhere and capture these really beautiful moments. And this was great because I got this frame where Emily was looking at a shoot going on with my friend Kat, and all the attendees were kind of shooting and coming up with some beautiful work. This was a lovely Martian-like landscape that we typically go to in the north of Iceland. Because Iceland has a variety of different landscapes, and this was no exception. But the issue here was that I wanted to also get a horizontal frame, but the moment had passed. Only if I had this tool at the time would have been wonderful, because you never know what you need for Instagram, for perhaps using it for a bio. Maybe you needed for commercial assets where you're trying to add text and titles to the top. Whatever it is, this is nice to be able to have that flexibility. So the way this works is that now that I have the frame expanded, I'm going to go ahead and click on my marquee tool here, and I'm going to first of all select this part here like so. Actually, let me do this. I'm going to go ahead and crop this in for just a second so that we can expand the borders left and right first, and then we'll expand at the bottom because that's going to be for a different example. So I'm going to go ahead and select everything, and including this little sliver of the image here. I'll click on Generative Fill at the bottom at this new contextual bar. If you do not have this bar that pops up here, simply go to Edit, and then you want to go to Generative Fill, and it gives you the same functionality. Then once that's done and you have this area here, just click on Generate. I'm not going to type in anything for the moment. I'm just going to show you how it works out of the box. And now in real time, it's generating in full resolution. This was shot on a Canon R5. And it's going to actually try and fill in the rest of the area just by guessing what it should look like. And there you go. It actually generated something. Now let's analyze this for a second here from a retouching standpoint. I'm very curious to see, does this hold up in full resolution? And in fact, it does. And for the most part, it does a really good job here. You can see that even the depth of field is matched. The colors are matched, the lighting is matched really well. Even this really subtle area at the top where you see this haziness is brought in to the left of the frame. It's hard to tell where the original border was and where it kind of expanded to. It also somehow did a very good job of continuing this edge of this sulfuric, fuming, pluming landscape behind it. And here at the bottom, you can see the rocks here are, I would say if I zoom into 100%, it's not perfect. You can see that there's a lot of pixelation going on here, but if you're using it for web or anything like that, it's great. Currently in the beta version, there's a limitation, I believe, to the resolution that it can produce. So keep that in mind, but it does a fairly good job of upscaling. If you decide that you want to use this commercially or at a higher resolution, you can always downscale the image and then upscale it using AI upscalers, and it should do a fairly good job. But now that we have this there, if you're not happy with it and want some other examples, you can click on the second or third options that it generates, the variations, and pick whichever one you want. I actually think that the first one was pretty good for our purposes, but the third one's also very good as well. They're honestly all very good, but it's cool to see the variations that it gives you. So let's go ahead and keep the first one for the nice rock context here to fill up the frame a little bit, and continue on to the next one. Now I'll do the same thing here on this side. I'll just go ahead and click that, Generative Fill, and hit Generate. And it's going to go ahead and do a solid job, I hope, with expanding that frame. I'm just going to keep this going here, and we're almost there. And continuing on further, we'll see how it does. Wow, that's really cool. I was very curious to see how it would do with this section here, because if we take this out, you can see that it had a lot of rocks, and I wasn't sure if it was going to try and continue that, and it did. It does a very good job doing that. So color me impressed, I guess. As a retoucher and somebody who would normally composite this from different elements or different shots, if you're working with a photographer that might not have assets that would allow you to expand the frame, now it gives you unlimited possibilities. So this is fantastic. I think I'm just going to go with one of these options here. The third one's nice because it continues a nice composition. And I like that it gives me 3 variations in such a short period of time. I wasn't expecting that at all. If you're not happy with any of these variations, you can simply delete and redo it again. Now let's go and expand the frame going vertically in terms of the bottom here. Well, I want to add a little bit more space to the floor, give her some more breathing room compositionally. So I'll do the same thing here, except this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Generative Fill, and I'm going to use the text prompt function. So with this text prompt, I'm going to say puddle with a reflection. So that way we get a little bit of interest. I am kind of holding my breath because I'm not sure what's going to happen. Because if you ever use content-aware fill, you know that often these things don't go so well. But this time, I'm hoping the future is now. Oh my gosh, that is really cool. All right, let's take a look here. So it did a very good job with the reflections. It also added the rock. It continued the rock face. If I take a look at the mask here, so you can see, if I just disable the mask for a second and enable that as its own little layer, so you can see it actually takes more than what we selected and regenerates, because we only selected this part here, but it actually generates more than that intentionally. So that's very interesting as a side note. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and compare these results here. Let's zoom in here for a second. So you see they continue the rock really nicely. It didn't do a fantastic job here in terms of the resolution, but we already kind of spoke about that, and we can easily just sharpen those details up and kind of either by using a high pass filter or by sharpen. But if you're interested in seeing more of that, I can make a separate video. Now let's compare some of these other results here under properties. Oh, wow. That is really interesting. Oh, huh. This one didn't do a puddle at all. It added more stone, which I think is really cool. It was very surprising. So I guess you can just continue building them till you find something that you're happy with. I think this is going to be great for our example, and I don't want to spend any more time on that, but you get the idea. Now that that's kind of there, let's go ahead and talk about content-aware scale. Normally what I would do in a situation like this before is I would use content-aware scale to elongate the image. Now, the way this doesn't work, because if I try to do that this time, if I go to Edit and content-aware scale, you see how if I hold Shift down and try to elongate it, you see that there's a limitation in how much you can really push it before it starts looking stretched. And that's why something like content-aware scale doesn't work in a situation like this, and where generative fill is clearly doing a much better job. So thanks to Adobe for kind of pushing the boundaries there. And what's great about this is that now we can try something else. Let's go ahead and remove logos. Typically what you would do is, use a clone brush or healing brush or a spot healing brush and remove the logo. But now we don't really have to do that. We can just go ahead and highlight the logo, hit Generative Fill, and I'll just say remove logo and hit generate. And then what it'll do is go ahead and remove the logo for me. This will also be curious. It'll also be interesting to see how this works on texture. So so that's really nice. It actually kept the texture of the softbox there. And that's really cool. I like that a lot. I think that's really beautiful. So, but that's a pretty easy task, I like that it kept the direction of the texture too. You can see that over here. It's perfect. The only, I guess, nitpick is the edges aren't perfect, but you can easily heal or clone that out. Next, we're going to go ahead and talk about flyaways. So this will be interesting. I like the flyaways here, but as an example, I'm going to go ahead and see if it does a good job of removing the flyaways or not. So I'm going to click and highlight these flyaways here like that. And I'm going to go ahead and say Generative Fill. I'll say remove flyaways. And I'll hit generate. This is all something that I haven't really tried before, and I am just excited to see what happens if I could repeat the process or not. Now that, oh my gosh, that is something else. All right, so let's take a look at this. We click Generate Flyaways, and as you can see here, it kind of adjusted the face, right? It tried to recreate that entire area, which is not terrible, and you can easily liquefy that to fix it. It also regenerated the edges of the hat and the eyes, and it blended the amount of noise and pixels perfectly, because you can see here that there's some noise going on in the image when you zoom in too much. Well, obviously if you're at 300%, there should be some pixelation, but it matched that really well. So there you have it. It does a great job with flyaways. Next, I want to compare how it does with the camera strap here. So let's go ahead and highlight this logo like so. And I'm going to say remove logo, and then I'll say generate. I'm just curious to see if it's actually going to remove the logo and keep the lines behind it. Well, I guess so. And there's 3 different options in case it's not perfect. Actually, the third one's pretty good too. It did a fairly good job. And as you can see here, every time that I make a selection, I don't have to go to the background. I can do it from any layer that I want. It contextually understands what I'm trying to do. It doesn't need a solid layer in order for me to make a selection. I can do it on a blank layer. I could do it any layer that I was working on originally, and it'll do it and then put it on its own layer. So there you go. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk about, removing this logo is let's talk about the other tool here in Photoshop that they updated called the remove tool. And this again is just in the beta, but let's just say that I have this logo and I want to use the remove tool to take it out. So I'll click on sample all layers here for a second. And there's a couple of options here, remove after each stroke or not. And I'm going to uncheck that because I'll do a few brush strokes collectively and then hit enter. So I'll just go ahead and do a few brush strokes here. I'm using my mouse so you can hear an audible response as opposed to my Wacom tablet. So that I have covered everything, now I'll hit enter or check, and then we're going to compare and see the results versus the remove tool. Now, it did didn't do so great. You can see here that there is still a line going through. Try to keep the texture here. So unfortunately, I think currently the remove tool isn't as great as the Generative Fill. Another example here is going to be the camera. Let's just say, okay, theoretically, that I want to remove this camera. Now, how do you think it's going to fare? I'll try to do the Generative Fill first. So I'm going to go ahead and select the camera, like so. And then I'll say Generative Fill, and I'll say remove camera. And contextually, it should analyze the scene and figure out that the camera is on the side of her and I want to kind of remove that and fill it in. Let's see what happens. Oh, wow. That did a very good job. That did an exceptional job, I have to say. Obviously, it continued and added a button here. It knew there was a jacket, and it also increased the edge. So that's not a problem. You can liquefy that in easily. There's another example here. It did a good job. It figured out that there's a jacket, and then in the edge of the jacket here is accounted for. And on this one, it brought it in. So it gave you 3 different positions of the jacket, which is incredible, right? I think that did a great job. I like the second one. I like seeing a little bit of that jacket hanging out. So I'll call this layer my camera. Now let's compare that with the remove tool. Let's see what happens here for a second and compare the results. I'm going to just highlight the camera like that. And then I'll say enter. Now, this is going to take a little bit longer because the remove tool itself isn't as quick, but it does a fairly good job. So this one did okay. You can see that if I bring up the curve here so we can all see what's happening, you can see the results aren't great. It's fine, but it's not great. It's not Generative Fill level great. So you can see there's a big difference in how Generative Fill works. Obviously there's some issues here, but it works very well and better than the remove tool in my opinion. The other great part is when you go back to the specific layer, you still have the other options available should you choose to revisit and change your mind. So that's really cool because now I can say, you know what? I think I want to go for another option, and they all do a better job, I think, personally speaking. So I think if we're going to remove objects, it's better to use the Generative Fill. Now, another thing that it did fail at, though, it doesn't do everything good. And I'm going to show you really quickly here. So I'm going to add birds in the sky. Okay, so I'm going to kind of generally highlight that area and say Generative Fill and say birds in the sky, and then click on generate, and we're going to see what it does. You know, it did such a good job with the landscape, you'd think you would do a good job with something so simple, but we're going to find out. Okay, we're almost there. So you can see that Emily, poor Emily, she's gonna hate me for agreeing to use this photo. I don't turned into an NC Escher painting. All right, so I don't think I need to add any more comments there. Maybe this should be the thumbnail of the video. I'm gonna call this birds and just kind of hide that here. Okay, great. We're just gonna pretend that didn't happen. And if you got up to this point in the video, please leave a comment about the birds. But yeah, there you go. So I hope this kind of gives you a good idea of Generative Fill and what it can do. And it can do all kinds of things. I've even tried to use it for patching in the jeans. And the remove tool, I think, worked better than Generative Fill in that section. We can also use it to change her boots. So I can say Generative Fill, change to different shoes, and then say generate, and then it will actually generate, hopefully, a different pair of shoes. Hopefully it does a better job than the birds. We're gonna find out. I would be curious to see what you all are using it for, and if you've had any success with it. So, well, wow. Oh boy. It actually did a good job with the perspective. But, you know, I wouldn't recommend to buy these shoes. I don't think these are Nikes. That's for sure. So yeah, it does something. It does a better job than I would have done in a couple of seconds. But overall, we've done a lot of work in a few seconds. So if you are looking to expand the frame and remove objects, this is your token. If you're looking to add elements or replace elements, well, you know, it's not the best. It's getting there, but there we go. Anyways, hope you all enjoyed this video, and I can't wait to hear what you all are thinking, what you all think of this, and what you have in mind with by using Generative Fill.